The flight attendant's face paled as Jamal Washington revealed his name on the boarding pass. 20 minutes earlier, she'd forced him from his first-class seat for a white businessman. Now, as CEO of Skyline Airlines' parent company, he simply smiled and said, "Meeting room, now." Before we dive into this shocking story, tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. If you've ever witnessed or experienced discrimination while traveling, this story will resonate with you. Hit that like button and subscribe now, because the justice served in the next few minutes will leave you speechless. Jamal Washington stood out as a beacon of success in America's cutthroat tech industry. At 38, his brilliant mind and relentless work ethic had transformed Phoenix Innovations from a small startup into a revolutionary force in sustainable energy solutions. His journey from the struggling neighborhoods of Southside Chicago to the elite corridors of corporate America represented the American dream realized against tremendous odds. Unlike many executives who inherited wealth or connections, Jamal built everything from scratch. His father worked double shifts at a factory while his mother cleaned office buildings at night. From those humble beginnings, he earned a scholarship to MIT, graduated at the top of his class, and turned down lucrative job offers to pursue his vision of creating affordable, renewable energy technology. "Never forget where you come from," his father had told him, "but never let anyone tell you where you can go." Those words fueled Jamal through countless rejections, microaggressions, and blatant discrimination as he climbed the corporate ladder. Now, as one of the few black CEOs in America's tech landscape, Jamal had just completed his most strategic move yet: the acquisition of GlobeTech, the parent company of Skyline Airlines. He had kept the acquisition quiet, working through shell companies and proxies to prevent price manipulation and to observe the company's operations authentically before making sweeping changes. His executive assistant, Lydia Chen, had just finalized the paperwork that morning. "Congratulations, you now own an airline," she had said with a smile. "Are you sure you don't want to use the corporate jet for your trip to Atlanta? The board members are already there, and your schedule is extremely tight." Jamal shook his head while packing his briefcase. "I need to experience our companies as a customer would. That's how we build better businesses." He straightened his designer
watch, not flashy, but worth more than some cars. Book me first class on Skyline.
"I want to see how they operate when they don't know the boss is watching." Lydia raised an eyebrow. "You know what happens sometimes when you travel commercial." Jamal nodded grimly. Despite his tailored suits, impressive resume, and considerable wealth, he still faced the same racial profiling that followed black men regardless of their station. Just 3 months earlier, a high-end boutique had called security when he browsed too long without making a purchase, despite the fact he'd spent thousands there before. "All the more reason to see how Skyline treats its passengers," he replied. "This Atlanta meeting could take Phoenix international. If the investors come through, we'll be bringing sustainable energy solutions to developing nations across 3 continents." As Jamal packed his carry-on with precision, he had no idea that his routine business trip would become a turning point, not just for him, but for an entire industry. "The car will be here in 20 minutes, Lydia reminded him. "Your boarding pass is on your phone. Skyline Flight 1287 departing at 2:30. "Perfect," Jamal said, sliding his laptop into its case. "Let's see what kind of company we just bought." He didn't bother with the chauffeur, taking an ordinary rideshare to the airport instead. The driver, an older black man named Harold, noticed Jamal's expensive shoes and laptop. "Business trip?" Harold asked, meeting Jamal's eyes in the rearview mirror. "Something like that," Jamal replied with a smile. "Well, good luck to you, brother. Always good to see one of us in the boardroom instead of the mailroom." Jamal tipped generously when they arrived at the terminal. Harold's words stayed with him as he navigated through security. The responsibility he carried wasn't just for himself. Every success, every failure would be magnified because of who he was and what he represented to others who looked like him. With his boarding pass on his phone and a first-class ticket that had cost over $2,000, Jamal headed for his gate, unaware that his identity was about to be tested in ways that would change the trajectory of not just his day, but his entire company. Jamal approached Gate 32 wearing comfortable yet expensive attire: dark jeans, a cashmere sweater, and limited edition sneakers that the average person wouldn't recognize, but fashion enthusiasts would value at over $800. He carried a leather messenger bag containing his laptop and essential documents for the Atlanta meeting. While his outfit wasn't flashy, the quality was evident to the discerning eye. The gate area buzzed with annoyed passengers. A digital board flashed a 45-minute delay for Skyline Airlines Flight 1287 to Atlanta. Jamal took a seat, pulled out his phone, and sent a quick text to update his executive team about the delay. When boarding finally began, Jamal waited patiently for first class to be called. As he approached the gate agent, he noticed her warm smile fade slightly as she scanned his boarding pass. She hesitated before returning his documentation, her eyes lingering a moment too long as if confirming he truly belonged in the premium cabin. "Enjoy your flight, sir," she said, her tone noticeably cooler than it had been with the white passengers before him. Jamal boarded the plane and located his seat, 2A, a window seat in first class. He stored his bag, settled in, and pulled out a business magazine featuring an article about Phoenix Innovation's recent successes. Though without mentioning the GlobeTech acquisition that remained confidential, a flight attendant named Rebecca Miller moved through the cabin, offering pre-departure beverages to first-class passengers. She warmly greeted an older white couple across the aisle, chatting briefly about their destination plans. When she reached Jamal, her demeanor shifted dramatically. "Can I see your boarding pass?" she asked without offering a drink or greeting. Jamal produced his phone showing the digital boarding pass. Rebecca scrutinized it longer than necessary, before nodding curtly. "Water," she stated rather than asked, placing a plastic cup on his armrest without making eye contact, then moving to the next passenger with her smile instantly restored. The contrast wasn't subtle. Jamal had experienced this kind of treatment before, the assumption that he didn't belong in premium spaces, the extra verification, the minimal service. He took a slow breath and reminded himself that these small indignities were why his work mattered, why representation in leadership positions was crucial. 20 minutes after boarding, with the plane still at the gate due to the delay, a commotion erupted at the front of the aircraft. A white man in his 50s, wearing an expensive but somewhat outdated suit, argued loudly with another flight attendant. "This is unacceptable. I fly over 100,000 miles annually with Skyline. I was promised an upgrade." The man's face had reddened with entitlement and frustration. The flight attendant, a younger woman named Sarah, attempted to calm him. "I understand your frustration, Mr. Huntington, but first class is completely full today. We can offer you priority seating in Economy Plus." "That's not good enough." The man, apparently named Huntington, fumed. "Check again. Someone must have been upgraded who has less status than me." Rebecca hurried over to assist her colleague, glancing around the first-class cabin as if searching for a solution. Her eyes landed on Jamal, and something shifted in her expression. She whispered something to Sarah, who looked skeptical but retreated to check something on her tablet. Moments later, Rebecca approached Jamal with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Sir, there seems to be a problem with your seating assignment," she began, her voice carrying just enough for nearby passengers to hear. Jamal looked up from his magazine. "Is there? My boarding pass says 2A and that's where I'm sitting." Rebecca lowered her voice slightly. "We have an elite status passenger who needs to be accommodated in first class. I'll need you to relocate to economy." Jamal kept his expression neutral despite the familiar surge of indignation. "I purchased this first-class ticket weeks ago. I'm not being downgraded because someone else wants my seat." Rebecca's smile tightened. "Sir, I don't think you understand. Mr. Huntington is one of our most valued customers." "And I'm not?" Jamal asked, reaching for his phone. "Let me show you my confirmation email again." He pulled up the email showing his first-class purchase, complete with the confirmation number and seat assignment. Rebecca barely glanced at it. "There must have been a system error," she insisted. "Your seat was supposed to be in economy." By now, several other first-class passengers were watching the interaction. None intervened. A white woman in the row, behind Jamal, whispered something to her companion, who nodded with a knowing look that suggested they'd already decided who didn't belong. "I'd like to speak to the head flight attendant," Jamal requested calmly, maintaining his composure despite the public humiliation unfolding. "I'll get him for you," Rebecca said with a hint of satisfaction, as if confident her superior would back her decision. Thomas Carter, the head flight attendant, appeared moments later. Tall with graying temples and an authoritative demeanor, he assessed the situation with a quick glance. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked, addressing Rebecca rather than Jamal. "This gentleman needs to be reseated in economy to accommodate Mr. Huntington, one of our Diamond Elite members," Rebecca explained, gesturing toward Jamal as if he were an inconvenient piece of luggage. Thomas turned to Jamal. "Sir, we apologize for the inconvenience, but we need to prioritize our highest-tier members. We can offer you a drink voucher for your trouble." Jamal remained seated. "I purchased this first-class ticket with my own money. Mr. Huntington isn't entitled to my seat regardless of his status level. That's not how this works." Thomas's expression hardened. "Actually, sir, the airline reserves the right to adjust seating as necessary. I'm going to have to insist you comply with my flight attendant's request." "On what grounds?" Jamal asked, his voice steady but firm. "Because I've shown you my confirmed first-class reservation." Thomas exchanged glances with Rebecca. "We believe there was a ticketing error." "A ticketing error you only discovered when a white passenger demanded an upgrade?" Jamal asked pointedly. The cabin grew uncomfortably quiet. Thomas's jaw tightened. "Sir, if you continue to be difficult, we may need to remove you from this flight entirely." Warren Huntington had approached during the exchange, standing behind Thomas with arms crossed and a satisfied smirk forming. Several other passengers stared, some appearing uncomfortable, others seeming to enjoy the spectacle. Jamal realized he had reached the point familiar to many black professionals: fight and potentially face escalating consequences, or swallow the injustice to avoid further problems. With the critical Atlanta meeting ahead, he couldn't afford to be removed from the flight or delayed further. "Fine," he said finally, gathering his belongings. "But I want your names and I will be filing a formal complaint." "Of course, sir," Thomas replied with false politeness, clearly unconcerned. As Jamal moved past them toward economy, Warren Huntington smugly took seat 2A, immediately pressing the call button to order a drink. Rebecca hurried to serve him with a warmth and deference she had never shown Jamal. "Sorry about that unpleasantness, Mr. Huntington," she said loudly enough for Jamal to hear as he walked away. "Some people just don't understand how things work." Jamal found himself directed to a middle seat in economy, between two large passengers who had already claimed both armrests. As he squeezed in, he discreetly took out his phone and began documenting the incident, including names, times, and specific statements. From his new seat, he could see Warren lounging comfortably in first class, raising a glass of champagne in what almost seemed like a toast to his victory. Thomas and Rebecca laughed at something Warren said, the three forming a perfect picture of casual discrimination in action. Jamal sent a quick encoded text to Lydia that would make sense only to her. Time to activate Protocol Renaissance. It was their code for major corporate changes that needed immediate preparation. As the plane finally began its taxi toward the runway, Jamal settled in for what would be his last flight as a passive observer of Skyline Airlines. By tomorrow, everything would change, but first, he needed more evidence. Squeezed into the middle seat 23B, Jamal felt the full contrast between first class and economy. His knees pressed against the seat in front of him, and both his seatmates had claimed the armrests, forcing him to hold his elbows tight against his body. The passenger to his right, a heavy-set white man in his 60s, gave him an annoyed glance when their shoulders inevitably touched due to the cramped conditions. "Sorry about that," Jamal said politely. The man grunted without making eye contact and shifted away as much as possible, creating a sliver of additional space between them that seemed more about avoiding contact than comfort. From this vantage point in economy, Jamal noticed patterns that might have escaped him in the isolation of first class. Flight attendants, including Rebecca and Thomas, moved through the cabin with visible biases in their service approach. White passengers received prompt attention, warm smiles, and proactive offers of assistance. In contrast, passengers of color often had to press their call buttons multiple times, received cursory service, and were sometimes spoken to with thinly veiled impatience. About 30 minutes into the flight, a beverage service began. As the cart approached his row, Jamal overheard a conversation between Rebecca and another flight attendant named Kelly. They stood in the galley just a few feet away, thinking the engine noise would mask their voices. "Can you believe that guy tried to argue about staying in first?" Rebecca whispered, clearly referring to Jamal. "As if he belonged there in the first place." Kelly laughed softly. "I know, right? Probably the first time he's ever been on a plane. Did you see his sneakers? Trying so hard to look like he has money." "Well, Mr. Huntington is much more our typical first-class passenger," Rebecca continued. "He knows how things work. And he tips well," Kelly added with a wink. Jamal quietly activated the voice recorder on his phone, capturing these unguarded moments of prejudice. The casual nature of their discrimination suggested this wasn't an isolated incident, but rather standard behavior at Skyline Airlines. As the drink cart reached his row, Kelly's customer service smile appeared. "What would you like to drink?" she asked without the warmth she'd shown to white passengers. "Cranberry juice, no ice, please," Jamal requested. She handed him a plastic cup filled mostly with ice and a half can of cranberry juice without a word, then turned to his white seatmate with a genuine smile. "And for you, sir? We have a nice selection of beverages today." The contrast was educational, if painfully familiar. To Jamal's left sat a black man in his early 40s who had been observing the same patterns. As Kelly moved on, the man leaned slightly toward Jamal. "Happens every time I fly Skyline," he said quietly. "I'm Darnell Johnson, by the way." "Jamal, Washington," Jamal replied, keeping his voice low. "You fly with them often?" Darnell nodded. "My company has a contract with them. I'm on this route at least twice a month. I own a logistics consulting firm in Atlanta." "And you always see this kind of treatment?" Jamal asked. "Always. Last month they randomly selected me for additional security screening for the 5th consecutive time. The white executive traveling with me has never been selected once." Darnell took a sip of his water. "I've filed complaints, but they disappear into a black hole." "That's unacceptable," Jamal said, his resolve strengthening. "It's the reality." Darnell shrugged, though the resignation in his voice was layered, with contained anger. "My white clients don't even notice it happening right in front of them." Over the next hour, Jamal and Darnell exchanged experiences of corporate discrimination, careful to keep their voices low. Darnell shared stories about Skyline specifically, how flight attendants routinely ignored service requests from passengers of color, how complaints from black passengers were dismissed as misunderstandings, and how the airline had a reputation among black professionals for consistently poor treatment. "I switched to them for the miles program, but I'm considering canceling my membership," Darnell admitted. "It's not worth the constant disrespect." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion several rows ahead. An elderly Indian woman had pressed her call button repeatedly for nearly 10 minutes, trying to get attention for what appeared to be a medical concern. Both Rebecca and Kelly had walked past without acknowledging her. When the woman's husband finally stood up to get their attention, Thomas approached with visible annoyance. "Sir, you need to remain seated when the seatbelt sign is on," he said sharply. "My wife is feeling unwell," the man explained, his accent thick with worry. "She has been pressing the button for help." Thomas glanced at the woman, who was breathing rapidly and pressing a hand to her chest. "Probably just anxiety or indigestion. Try to relax, ma'am." Jamal watched in disbelief as Thomas began to walk away without offering any assistance. The woman's distress was clearly more than anxiety. Her face had paled considerably, and she was now struggling to speak. Without hesitation, Jamal unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. "Excuse me," he called to Thomas. "That woman needs medical attention immediately. She's showing signs of a possible cardiac event." Thomas turned back with a frown. "Sir, are you a doctor?" "I served as a volunteer EMT through college and recognized the symptoms," Jamal replied, which was true. He had worked as an emergency medical technician to help pay for expenses not covered by his scholarship. "She needs attention now." Several passengers had turned to watch the interaction. Thomas, aware of the audience, reluctantly approached the Indian woman again. "Ma'am, are you experiencing chest pain?" The woman nodded, still struggling to breathe properly. Thomas finally called for the first aid kit and made an announcement requesting medical professionals on board. A nurse in economy came forward, confirming what Jamal had observed. The woman was having a cardiac event that required immediate attention. The flight was diverted to the nearest airport, where emergency medical services met the plane. As paramedics boarded to treat the woman, Jamal noticed Thomas and Rebecca watching him with newfound wariness. Their dismissive attitude had nearly resulted in a tragedy, and Jamal's medical knowledge had exposed their negligence. When the flight resumed its journey to Atlanta, the atmosphere had shifted. Other passengers of color began quietly approaching. Jamal and Darnell, sharing their own experiences with Skyline's discriminatory practices. A Latina executive described being repeatedly mistaken for a flight attendant despite her business attire. An Asian American professor related how his first-class upgrade had been questioned 3 separate times on his last flight. Have you ever experienced discrimination on Skyline Airlines? Comment number 1 if you've faced unfair treatment while traveling, or number 2 if you've witnessed it happening to someone else. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to see what happens next in this unbelievable true story. But seriously, what would you do if you were in Jamal's position? Would you speak up immediately or gather evidence first? The next part of this story will show you exactly how Jamal handled this situation. And trust me, it's not what you'd expect. By the time the plane began its descent into Atlanta, Jamal had collected testimonies from 7 different passengers and recorded multiple instances of biased treatment by the crew. He had quietly built a case that went far beyond his own experience. Darnell, impressed by Jamal's methodical approach, handed him a business card. "Whatever you're planning to do with this information, I want to help. This has gone on too long." Jamal accepted the card with a smile. "I have a feeling we'll be working together sooner than you think." As the plane touched down in Atlanta, Jamal mentally prepared for the confrontation ahead. The flight attendants had no idea that their actions today wouldn't just cost them their jobs. They were about to change an entire corporate culture. The Atlanta airport buzzed with activity as passengers from Skyline Flight 1287 disembarked. Jamal Washington purposely slowed his pace, allowing most passengers to exit ahead of him. He wanted to time this perfectly. Darnell Johnson gave him a curious look. "You're not in a hurry to get off this plane?" "Just timing something," Jamal replied quietly, watching as Rebecca and Thomas stood near the exit, offering their insincere "thank you for flying with us" to departing passengers. When Warren Huntington passed them, Rebecca beamed. "Thank you for flying Skyline, Mr. Huntington. We hope you enjoyed your first-class experience." "Much better after you sorted out that seating situation," Warren replied with a smug smile, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Some people just don't know their place." Thomas chuckled in agreement, not noticing Jamal approaching behind Warren. "Enjoy your stay in Atlanta, sir." As Jamal reached the exit, Rebecca's smile turned plastic. "Thank you for your cooperation today," she said, with thinly veiled satisfaction. Thomas added with false politeness, "Perhaps next time you should double-check your ticket class before boarding." Jamal maintained a neutral expression as he exited the jetway. In the terminal, he spotted Warren attempting to network with other business travelers, handing out cards and mentioning his connections with an air of self-importance. Jamal's phone buzzed with urgent messages. His executive team had been busy since his coded text, "Lydia, emergency board meeting arranged for 5 p.m. Legal team standing by." SVP of Operations. Full background check on flight crew complete. Sending to your secure email. Chief Legal Officer. PR team ready with statements. Need your go-ahead. Jamal texted back a simple response. Proceeding with Phase 1. Meet at Airport Conference Room B24 in 30 minutes. He approached the gate, desk where a Skyline agent was managing the next departure. The agent, a young woman named Ashley, barely looked up as he approached. "Excuse me," Jamal began. "I need to speak with the flight crew from the Chicago flight that just arrived." "They're heading to their next assignment," Ashley replied dismissively. "If you have a complaint, you can fill out a form online." This is more urgent, Jamal insisted. Could you please ask them to remain at the gate for a few minutes? Ashley sighed with visible annoyance. Sir, our crews operate on strict schedules. Whatever your issue is. Jamal reached into his pocket and produced a business card. Not his standard Phoenix Innovations card, but one identifying him as Chief Executive Officer of Globetech Corporation. He placed it on the counter. I need to speak with them immediately. Please call your supervisor. Ashley's eyes widened as she read the card. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the phone. I'll get my manager right away, sir. Within minutes, a flustered gate supervisor appeared. Mr. Washington, I'm Patricia Nelson, Customer Service Manager. How can I assist you today? I need the flight crew from Chicago held here, and I require a conference room for an immediate meeting. Patricia looked uncertain. The crew has a tight connection to their next flight and cancel their next assignment, Jamal interrupted firmly. And recall them to this gate now. Patricia's confusion was evident. Sir, I don't have the authority to. As of 9 this morning, I am the CEO of Globetech, Skyline's parent company, Jamal explained calmly. I believe that gives me the necessary authority. The color drained from Patricia's face. I wasn't informed of any change in leadership. The announcement goes public tomorrow. Now please do as I've asked. Patricia scrambled to comply, calling frantically on her radio. Thomas, Rebecca, all flight attendants from 1287, please return to gate D23 immediately. Priority 1. Jamal watched as confusion spread among the airport staff. Word traveled quickly, and soon several Skyline managers appeared, trying to understand what was happening. Minutes later, Thomas and Rebecca returned to the gate, looking annoyed until they saw the growing group of executives. Behind them, Kelly and the other flight attendants followed with concerned expressions. What's going on? Thomas asked, his authoritative demeanor faltering slightly. Patricia gestured nervously toward Jamal. This is Mr. Washington, the new CEO of Globetech. Recognition and horror dawned on Rebecca's face as she finally made the connection. The passenger from 2A, she whispered. Warren Huntington had lingered, near the gate, intrigued by the commotion. As he recognized Jamal at the center of the gathering, his smug expression dissolved into shock. Conference room B24, Jamal instructed Patricia. Have security escort Mr. Huntington there as well. Warren attempted to back away. I have a connecting flight to catch. Cancel it, Jamal cut him off. You're part of this discussion too. As word spread about what was happening, passengers from the flight began to gather, including Darnell and several others who had shared their discriminatory experiences with Jamal. Jamal approached Darnell directly. Mr. Johnson, would you be willing to join this meeting and share your experiences with Skyline's executive team? Darnell's eyes widened with understanding. You planned this all along, didn't you? Let's just say I was prepared for the possibility, Jamal replied. Will you join us? Absolutely, Darnell agreed without hesitation. As the impromptu procession moved toward the conference room, Jamal received another urgent message. The regional director of Skyline Airlines, Howard Phillips, was racing to the airport from downtown Atlanta. The conference room quickly filled beyond capacity. Flight crew members sat rigidly on one side. Airport managers clustered nervously by the door, and Jamal positioned himself at the head of the table with Darnell and the other passenger witnesses nearby. Warren Huntington was escorted in by security, his earlier confidence replaced by nervous fidgeting. He attempted to catch Thomas's eye, but the head flight attendant was staring fixedly at the table. Just as Jamal was about to begin, Howard Phillips burst into the room, breathing heavily from his rush through the terminal. In his 50s with a polished appearance and the smooth manner of a career corporate politician, Howard quickly assessed the situation. Mr. Washington, he began with a forced smile. What an unexpected pleasure. I understand there's been some confusion on one of our flights today. No confusion, Mr. Phillips, Jamal replied evenly. I experienced your airline's discriminatory practices firsthand, and I'm here to address them. Howard's smile didn't waver. I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding that we can resolve privately. Perhaps we could speak in my office. This will be addressed here and now, Jamal stated firmly, with everyone involved present. The room fell silent as Jamal removed his phone and connected it to the conference room's audio system. Let's begin with what happened on today's flight. As the recordings played, capturing Rebecca and Kelly's racist comments, Thomas's dismissal of the medical emergency, and multiple instances of biased treatment, the color drained from the flight crew's faces. Howard Phillips maintained his composed expression, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. When the recordings ended, Jamal looked directly at Howard. This is unacceptable in any company, but especially one that I now own. Howard cleared his throat. Mr. Washington, while I deeply regret your experience today, I assure you this is an isolated incident that doesn't reflect Skyline's values. We'll terminate Rebecca and Thomas immediately, and... This is not an isolated incident, Jamal interrupted. Mr. Johnson, would you share your experiences as a frequent Skyline passenger? Darnell described the pattern of discrimination he'd observed over months of flying with the airline. When he finished, other passengers followed with their accounts, painting a damning picture of systemic racism throughout Skyline's operations. Howard shifted uncomfortably. We take these allegations very seriously, but anecdotal experiences don't necessarily indicate. Jamal cut him off again. My team has been analyzing complaint data since I texted them from the plane. In the past year alone, Skyline has received 417 formal complaints about discriminatory treatment. 89% were closed without action. 73% of those complaints came from passengers of color. He slid a tablet toward Howard showing the analysis. This isn't anecdotal, Mr. Phillips. It's a pattern that you've systematically ignored and buried. Rebecca finally spoke up, her voice shaking. Mr. Washington, I want to apologize for any misunderstanding. We were simply following company protocol for accommodating elite status members. Is it protocol to mock passengers based on their race? Jamal asked. To ignore medical emergencies? To assume someone doesn't belong in first class because of the color of their skin? Thomas attempted a defense. Sir, we treat all passengers equally. Mr. Huntington's status level entitled him to someone else's confirmed seat? Jamal finished. Show me where that's written in Skyline's policies. Warren Huntington, who had remained uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly stood. This is ridiculous. I've been a Diamond member for 15 years. The airline has always accommodated me this way. At the expense of other paying customers? Jamal asked. Look, Warren blustered. I have connections on the GlobeTech board. I play golf with Stephen Blackwell every month. When he hears about this witch hunt, Stephen Blackwell voted unanimously with the rest of the board to approve my acquisition and appointment, Jamal informed him coolly, and I doubt he'd appreciate you invoking his name to defend discriminatory practices. Warren fell silent, his bluff called. Howard Phillips, sensing the gravity of the situation, changed tactics. Mr. Washington, I want to personally assure you that I had no knowledge of these issues. I'll immediately terminate the crew members involved and implement new training protocols. You had every knowledge, Jamal contradicted him. My team found 7 discrimination complaints that were escalated directly to your office in the past 3 months alone. You personally marked them as resolved, no action required. Howard paled. There must be some mistake. No mistake, Jamal stated firmly. The problem isn't just with these flight attendants, Mr. Phillips. It starts at the top. Your leadership has created a culture where this behavior is tolerated and even rewarded. He turned to address everyone in the room. Effective immediately. I am implementing a complete overhaul of Skyline Airlines' policies, practices, and leadership. The discrimination ends today. Howard's composure finally cracked. You can't just come in and turn everything upside down. Think of the business implications, the schedules, I'm thinking of the customers who have been disrespected, and the employees who have been taught that discrimination is acceptable business practice, Jamal replied. And I'm thinking of the significant legal and financial liability Skyline has accumulated under your leadership. As if on cue, Jamal's phone buzzed with an incoming message. It appears this incident has already reached social media. A passenger recorded my removal from first class and Thomas's dismissal of the medical emergency. It's trending on Twitter. Howard's face fell as he realized the public relations nightmare unfolding. We can contain this, he began desperately. Issue a statement. Offer compensation. We're well beyond that point, Mr. Phillips, Jamal said, standing to signal the meeting's conclusion. My team will take over from here. You, Rebecca, Thomas, and Kelly are suspended pending a full investigation. Mr. Huntington, I suggest you find another airline for your return trip. As security arrived to escort the suspended employees from the building, reporters had already gathered outside the conference room, alerted by the viral social media posts and tipped off about the confrontation happening inside. Jamal turned to Darnell Johnson before facing the press. Mr. Johnson, I think your experience could be valuable beyond just today. Would you be interested in continuing this conversation? Darnell nodded with determination. Absolutely. It's time for real change. With that, Jamal stepped out to address the waiting cameras, ready to transform a personal humiliation into a watershed moment for corporate accountability. Conference room B24 had been quickly transformed into a command center. Jamal's executive team from Phoenix Innovations had arrived, setting up laptops and communication systems around the large oval table. Lydia Chen efficiently coordinated between legal advisors, PR specialists, and operations analysts who were streaming in both physically and virtually. The social media response is growing exponentially, reported Dylan Alvarez, Phoenix's head of communications. We're tracking over 60,000 mentions in the last hour alone. The video of your removal from first class has been viewed 2 million times already. Jamal nodded, scanning the latest data on his tablet. What's the sentiment analysis? Overwhelmingly supportive of you and critical of Skyline, Dylan answered. Hashtags like Dacha, Sky Shameline, and Flying While Black are trending nationally. Howard Phillips sat at the far end of the table, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. Every few minutes his phone buzzed with messages from increasingly panicked Skyline board members and executives. The door opened, and Howard visibly straightened as several members of Skyline's executive leadership team entered, all summoned by Jamal's orders. They looked bewildered and concerned, having received only vague information about a crisis involving their new parent company's CEO. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, Jamal began, standing to address the expanded group. I'm Jamal Washington, as of this morning the new CEO of Globetech Corporation, Skyline's parent company. Murmurs rippled through the room as the Skyline executives processed this unexpected news. Their confusion only deepened when they noticed the suspended flight crew sitting rigidly against the wall, looking like defendants awaiting sentencing. I'd planned to introduce myself through conventional channels next week, Jamal continued, but circumstances have forced an accelerated timeline. Today, while flying as a regular customer on Skyline Flight 1287 from Chicago, I experienced firsthand the discriminatory practices that appear to be standard operating procedure at your airline. He gestured to a large screen where Dylan had cued the viral video capturing Jamal's removal from first class. As it played, the Skyline executives watched with growing horror. When the video ended, Jamal didn't allow the silence to linger. This isn't an isolated incident. Mr. Johnson, would you share your perspective as a frequent Skyline customer? Darnell stepped forward, now dressed in a crisp suit after having retrieved his luggage. His demeanor was professional, but his words carried the weight of repeated indignities. I've flown Skyline twice monthly for the past 3 years, he began. In that time, I've been randomly selected for additional screening 14 times. I've been questioned about my first-class ticket on 9 separate occasions. I've had my loyalty status questioned, despite being a platinum member. I've filed 7 formal complaints, none of which received meaningful responses. As Darnell spoke, several other passengers from the flight who had agreed to participate entered the room. Each shared their experiences, not just from today's flight, but patterns of discrimination they'd observed or experienced across multiple Skyline journeys. Sophia Washington, Skyline's VP of Customer Experience, looked genuinely distressed. Mr. Washington, Mr. Johnson, I want to personally apologize. I had no idea this was happening with such frequency. Howard Phillips attempted to interrupt. Sophia, we should discuss this internally before. That approach is precisely why we're here today, Jamal cut him off. The habit of handling discrimination complaints internally, which apparently means ignoring them, ends now. He nodded to Lydia, who distributed tablets to everyone present. My team has analyzed customer complaint data, social media, mentions, and employee reports for the past 36 months. The pattern is undeniable. The screen at the front of the room displayed a series of damning statistics. Complaints from passengers of color were closed without action at 8 times the rate of complaints from white passengers. Flight attendants of color received disciplinary actions at 3 times the rate of their white colleagues for similar infractions. Internal promotions showed clear racial disparities that couldn't be explained by performance metrics. This is deeply concerning, admitted Raymond Torres, Skyline's chief financial officer. But surely you don't think the entire company operates this way? The data suggests the problem is systemic, Jamal replied. Which brings me to the next point. He nodded to Dylan, who played another recording, this one capturing Rebecca and Kelly's racist comments in the galley, followed by clips of Thomas dismissing the Indian woman's medical emergency and later mocking passengers of color with other crew members. Rebecca attempted to defend herself. Those comments were private conversations taken out of context. Recording us without consent is... Georgia is a one-party consent state for recordings, interrupted Amara Jackson, Phoenix's chief legal officer. And airplane galleys on commercial flights have been repeatedly ruled as having no expectation of privacy. Your comments are legally admissible in any proceeding. Warren Huntington, who had remained uncharacteristically silent, suddenly stood up. This is ridiculous. You're blowing a simple seating misunderstanding into a corporate witch hunt. Mr. Huntington, Jamal addressed him directly. The data shows you've been involved in 8 separate incidents where passengers of color were displaced to accommodate your upgrades, despite them having confirmed reservations. That's not a misunderstanding. It's a pattern. Warren's face reddened. I've been a loyal customer for 20 years. I expect certain accommodations. At the expense of other paying customers? Asked Sophia Washington, clearly troubled by the revelations. Come on, Warren scoffed. We all know how things work. Some passengers are more valuable than others. And how exactly do you determine that value, Mr. Huntington? Jamal asked pointedly. Warren faltered, suddenly aware of how his words sounded in the context of the meeting. Howard Phillips attempted to regain control of the situation. Mr. Washington, I understand your concerns, but these are complex operational issues. Perhaps the simplest solution is to terminate the crew members involved in today's incident and implement some additional training. That's your solution? Jamal asked incredulously. Fire a few frontline employees while leaving the system that encouraged their behavior intact? Howard persisted. Rebecca and Thomas clearly violated our policies. They should bear responsibility for their actions. They should, Jamal agreed. But so should the leadership that created an environment where such behavior is tolerated and even rewarded. He turned to address the entire room. The problem at Skyline isn't just a few biased employees. It's a culture that begins at the top. Mr. Phillips, your own email records show that you've personally dismissed dozens of discrimination complaints without investigation. You've promoted employees with documented histories of biased behavior. You've created incentive structures that disproportionately penalize minority passengers and staff. Howard's face paled as he realized the depth of the investigation Jamal's team had conducted in just a few hours. You can't possibly expect to overhaul an entire airline's operations based on one day's observation, Howard protested weakly. This isn't based on one day, Jamal corrected him. My team has been analyzing Skyline's operations for weeks as part of the acquisition due diligence. Today, simply confirmed what the data already suggested. Jamal turned to Darnell. Mr. Johnson, you mentioned your background in logistics and organizational consulting. What would you recommend as a first step to address these issues? Darnell considered the question thoughtfully. From what I've seen, this requires a comprehensive approach. New leadership, revised policies, improved accountability measures, and a commitment to cultural change that goes beyond superficial diversity training. Precisely, Jamal agreed. Which is why effective immediately, I'm announcing the following changes. He displayed a new organizational chart on the screen. Howard Phillips, Rebecca Miller, Thomas Carter, and Kelly Adams are suspended pending further investigation. I'm establishing an independent review board to evaluate all discrimination complaints filed in the past 5 years, with authority to recommend appropriate remedies. Howard jumped to his feet. You can't do this. The operational disruption will be catastrophic. Think of the schedules, the connections, I'm thinking of the customers who deserve respect regardless of their race, Jamal interrupted. And I'm thinking of the significant legal liability Skyline has accumulated under your leadership. One class action lawsuit from discriminated customers could cost hundreds of millions. This isn't just a moral imperative, it's sound business practice. Warren Huntington, seeing the direction things were headed, attempted one last power play. My friends on the GlobeTech board will hear about this overreaction. Victoria Blackwell and I have been associates for 20 years. Victoria Blackwell approved my appointment and this acquisition unanimously, Jamal informed him. But feel free to call her. I'm sure she'd be interested to hear how you expect preferential treatment at the expense of other paying customers. Warren's bluster deflated visibly. As the meeting continued, reporters had gathered outside the conference room, alerted by the viral social media posts and airport employees who had witnessed the earlier confrontation. News vans were already setting up in the airport parking lot. Howard looked out the conference room windows at the media presence with growing alarm. This is going to destroy our reputation, he muttered. Your discriminatory practices were already doing that, Jamal replied. The difference is, now we're going to fix the problem, not hide it. As the meeting progressed, Jamal outlined his vision for transforming Skyline's culture. He announced the creation of a passenger bill of rights with clear anti-discrimination provisions, mandatory accountability training for all staff, and a transparent complaint resolution process. This isn't just about avoiding negative publicity, he explained. It's about building a better company that serves all its customers with dignity and respect. By the meeting's end, the suspended employees were escorted from the building, and a preliminary press statement was prepared. The remaining Skyline executives, recognizing both the moral and business imperatives of Jamal's approach, began to engage constructively with the transformation plan. As the meeting adjourned, Darnell approached Jamal privately. That was impressive, he said. But you know they'll fight back once the initial shock wears off. Jamal nodded. I'm counting on it. Real change never comes without resistance. Outside the conference room, the gathered media called for statements. The story was already spreading across social media platforms and news outlets, with commentators debating the implications for the airline industry and corporate America more broadly. What had begun as a routine business trip had transformed into a watershed moment, not just for Jamal Washington and Skyline Airlines, but potentially for how corporations addressed systemic discrimination in their operations. As Jamal prepared to address the waiting cameras, he knew that the real challenges were just beginning. The next 24 hours would determine whether this moment became a footnote or a turning point. By sunrise the following morning, what had begun as an incident on a single flight had exploded into a national conversation about race, privilege, and corporate responsibility. Skyline racism and Jamal Washington trended across all major social media platforms. Morning news programs led with the story, featuring experts debating the implications for the airline industry and corporate America at large. In a luxurious hotel suite converted into a temporary command center, Jamal participated in an emergency video conference with the GlobeTech Board of Directors. The massive screen displayed 12 faces in a grid, their expressions ranging from concern to outright alarm. The stock has dropped 17 points since markets opened, reported Arnold Kessler, GlobeTech's chief financial officer. That's nearly $400 million in market capitalization vanished in 90 minutes. Victoria Blackwell, the influential board member who had championed Jamal's acquisition, maintained a poker face. At 62, she had navigated countless corporate crises during her career and wasn't easily rattled. The question isn't today's stock price, she stated coolly. It's whether Jamal's approach is the right long-term strategy for addressing what appears to be a significant liability. Other board members weren't as measured. Randall Morrison, a third-generation investment banker with old money connections, leaned toward his camera with barely contained anger. This should have been handled privately, he insisted. Firing an entire executive team publicly, humiliating, paying customers, inviting media scrutiny. These are not the actions of a prudent CEO. Jamal listened to the concerns without interrupting. When everyone had spoken, he addressed the board directly. "I understand your concerns about the short-term market reaction," he began. "But consider the alternative. The video of my removal from first class had already gone viral before I revealed my identity. If Globetech's new CEO had been seen capitulating to discriminatory treatment, then issuing some bland corporate statement afterward, the damage to our credibility would have been incalculable." He shared his screen to display a slide prepared by his analytics team. "Our social sentiment analysis shows that while Skyline is facing criticism, public perception of Globetech's leadership has improved by 28% overnight. The market is reacting to uncertainty, not disapproval." Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "Jamal has a point. We purchased Skyline knowing it needed significant operational improvements. This accelerates the timeline, but doesn't change the fundamental strategy." Before others could respond, Jamal's phone buzzed with an urgent message from Lydia. He glanced at it discreetly. "Warren Huntington on CNBC now. Attacking you personally. Turn to channel 352. "Excuse me for one moment," Jamal said to the board, reaching for the remote to activate the suite's second television. Warren Huntington's flushed face filled the screen as he spoke animatedly to a morning show host. Completely unprofessional behavior from someone clearly not ready for executive leadership. This is what happens when companies prioritize diversity, hiring over experience and qualifications. The host, to her credit, pushed back. "Mr. Huntington, Jamal Washington built Phoenix Innovations from nothing into a billion-dollar enterprise. His credentials are hardly in question. There's a difference between running a small tech startup and managing a major corporation," Warren dismissed. "And his vindictive actions yesterday prove he's acting on personal grievances rather than sound business judgment." The camera returned to the host. "We should note that Mr. Huntington was involved in the incident on Skyline Airlines yesterday, where Mr. Washington was removed from his first-class seat reportedly to accommodate Mr. Huntington." Warren's face reddened further. "That's a complete mischaracterization." Jamal muted the television and turned back to the board. "As you can see, this situation will continue to unfold in the public eye regardless of our approach. The question is whether we lead the narrative or react to it." Victoria Blackwell leaned forward. "Jamal, while I supported your acquisition and believe in your vision, I must express concern about the scale and speed of these changes. The entire executive team of Skyline was complicit in a pattern of discrimination that exposed us to massive legal liability." Jamal completed her thought. "My team has identified at least 3 incidents in the past year alone that could have resulted in class action lawsuits if the affected passengers had connected with each other." He shared another document, a legal analysis of Skyline's potential exposure based on documented complaints and incidents. The potential damages ran into hundreds of millions. The board members' expressions sobered as they reviewed the numbers. "This isn't just about doing the right thing morally," Jamal continued. "It's sound business practice to address these issues decisively before they become even more costly." As the meeting continued, Jamal's executive team kept him updated via text on developments happening simultaneously. Amara Jackson, legal. Former Skyline employees contacting us with more evidence of discriminatory policies. Potential whistleblowers. Dylan Alvarez, communications. Media requests overwhelming. Every major network requesting interviews. Lydia Chen. Howard Phillips holding unauthorized press conference at Skyline HQ in 30 minutes. SVP of Operations. Anonymous threats against you increasing on fringe forums. Security team implementing additional protocols. The board meeting concluded with cautious support for Jamal's approach, though several members continued to express reservations about the public nature of the confrontation. Victoria Blackwell remained his strongest ally, though even she counseled a more measured approach moving forward. The immediate crisis management was necessary, she acknowledged, but the rebuilding phase requires strategic precision. As soon as the call ended, Jamal's suite filled with his core team for an urgent strategy session. Amara Jackson, his chief legal officer, spoke first. "We've received contact from 37 former Skyline employees since yesterday evening," she reported. "Many have documented evidence of discriminatory policies that came directly from Howard Phillips and his leadership team. Any potential legal challenges to the suspensions?" Jamal asked. "They'll try," Amara confirmed. "But the evidence is overwhelming, and their employment contracts give us clear authority to take this action." Dylan Alvarez updated the media. Situation. Howard's unauthorized press conference is clearly an attempt to regain control of the narrative. He's positioned himself as a victim of corporate politics and is implying that your actions are part of a personal vendetta. "And the public response?" Jamal asked. "Mixed but trending in our favor," Dylan replied. "Industry insiders are skeptical, but general public sentiment strongly supports your actions. The video evidence is compelling." Lydia handed Jamal a secure phone. "Darnell Johnson is online too. He says it's important." Jamal took the call, listening intently as Darnell shared new information. When he hung up, his expression was grim. Darnell just learned that Warren Huntington has connections to 3 GlobeTech board members through a golf club membership. "He's actively lobbying them to call an emergency session to reverse my decisions." The team exchanged concerned glances. "That explains why Morrison was so agitated during the call," Lydia observed. "We need to stay ahead of this," Jamal decided. "Lydia, arrange a meeting with those board members before Warren can get to them. Amara, prepare documentation of Warren's history with Skyline, especially any incidents involving preferential treatment at others' expense." As the team mobilized, Jamal's phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "You should have stayed in your place. Not everyone can be taught their lesson with just a seat change. Back off or find out." The threat was followed by personal details about Jamal's family members and their locations. Security was immediately notified and protective measures implemented. Have you ever faced backlash when standing up against discrimination? Comment number 1 if you believe Jamal is making the right decisions, or number 2 if you think he's taking too big a risk. Don't forget to like and subscribe to see how this incredible story continues to unfold. What would you do if powerful people threatened your family because you exposed their wrongdoing? In the next part, you'll see exactly how Jamal handles these escalating threats while fighting for justice. By midday, Howard Phillips's press conference had backfired spectacularly. Former Skyline employees had come forward with corroborating accounts of the discriminatory culture he had fostered. Social media users had dug up previous incidents involving Skyline that showed a clear pattern matching Jamal's allegations, but the corporate battle was intensifying behind the scenes. Warren Huntington had indeed contacted his allies on the board. Victoria Blackwell called Jamal to warn him of a potential emergency vote being organized to limit his authority. "They can't remove you outright," she explained, "but they're discussing restrictions on personnel decisions without board approval. It would effectively hamstring your ability to implement the changes you've announced." "How many votes do they have?" Jamal asked. 5 confirmed. They need 7 for a majority." "And you?" "I'm with you," Victoria assured him. "But I'm only 1 vote. You need to make your case to the others before this comes to a formal motion." As Jamal prepared his strategy for addressing the board challenge, Lydia entered with more concerning news. "Competitors are already reaching out to Skyline's corporate clients," she reported. "They're suggesting that service disruptions are inevitable and offering special incentives to switch carriers." The pressure was mounting from all sides. The stock continued to slide, threats against Jamal increased, and the media scrutiny intensified. Even some of his allies were beginning to question whether he had moved too aggressively. That evening, as Jamal reviewed security footage from the Skyline headquarters showing employees removing documents despite the ongoing investigation, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Victoria Blackwell. "Jamal," she began without preamble, "we need to talk in person. There's more to this situation than you know." Her tone suggested this wasn't a conversation for an unsecured line. They arranged to meet at Jamal's hotel in 1 hour. As he waited, Jamal reflected on how quickly his professional triumph, acquiring Globetech and expanding Phoenix Innovations' reach, had turned into a high-stakes battle that now threatened everything he had built. Yet he remained convinced that addressing the discrimination directly, rather than sweeping it under the rug, was the right approach, both morally and strategically. The question now was whether he would have the opportunity to prove it, or whether the forces aligning against him would prevail before his vision could be realized. The grand ballroom of the Atlanta Meridian Hotel buzzed with anticipation. Over 100 journalists packed the space, cameras positioned strategically to capture every angle. Network logos from across the nation and several international outlets adorned microphones clustered at the podium. Behind the stage, Jamal Washington adjusted his tie as Dylan Alvarez briefed him on last-minute developments. Howard Phillips released additional statements questioning your experience and qualifications, Dylan reported. He's framing this as a hostile takeover by someone unfamiliar with the airline industry. Jamal nodded calmly. And the board situation? Victoria convinced them to wait until after this press conference before taking any action, Lydia Chen added, checking her tablet. She's bought you some time, but Morrison and his allies are still pushing for an emergency vote to restrict your authority. Amara Jackson approached with a security update. We've implemented additional measures based on those threats. Your family has been moved to a secure location, and we have plainclothes security throughout the venue. Jamal took a deep breath, centering himself. The past 24 hours had been a whirlwind of crisis management, strategic planning, and navigating both public scrutiny and corporate politics. Now came the moment to address the world directly. It's time, he said, straightening his shoulders. As Jamal stepped onto the stage, camera flashes erupted like lightning. He approached the podium with measured confidence, taking a moment to survey the room before speaking. The silence that fell was electric with anticipation. Good morning, he began, his voice steady and clear. My name is Jamal Washington. I am the CEO of Phoenix Innovations and, as of yesterday, the new Chief Executive Officer of Globetech Corporation, which includes Skyline Airlines among its holdings. He paused, making eye contact with various journalists before continuing. Yesterday, while traveling as an ordinary passenger on Skyline Airlines Flight 1287 from Chicago to Atlanta, I experienced something that too many Americans face daily: discrimination based on the color of my skin. Jamal recounted the incident in precise detail: his removal from his rightful first-class seat, the preferential treatment given to Warren Huntington, the dismissive attitude of the flight crew, and their subsequent racist comments overheard in economy class. What happened to me wasn't an isolated incident, he continued. It was a manifestation of systemic issues within Skyline's culture, issues that data shows have affected thousands of passengers and employees. He gestured toward a large screen behind him, which displayed statistical analysis of discrimination complaints, their resolution rates, and disturbing patterns in how they were handled. As business leaders, we have two options when confronted with evidence of discrimination within our organizations, Jamal stated. We can minimize, deny, and bury the problem, the approach Skyline's previous leadership consistently took. Or we can acknowledge the issue openly and address it directly. The room remained captivated as Jamal outlined the evidence his team had gathered, not just from his personal experience, but from months of data analysis, customer complaints, and employee testimonials. This isn't about one bad day or a few problematic employees, he emphasized. The data reveals a pattern of discrimination that was not just tolerated, but enabled by leadership structures and incentive systems. Then came the announcement that sent ripples through the business world. Effective immediately, I am removing the entire executive leadership team of Skyline Airlines, pending a thorough investigation of their role in perpetuating discriminatory practices. Gasps and frantic typing filled the room as journalists raced to report this unprecedented move. In their place, I am appointing an interim leadership team tasked with implementing comprehensive reforms to address these systemic issues. Jamal gestured toward the side of the stage, where Darnell Johnson appeared in a perfectly tailored suit. I'm pleased to introduce Darnell Johnson, founder and CEO of Optimal Systems Consulting, who will serve as our new diversity and inclusion officer with full executive authority to implement and oversee these changes. Darnell stepped forward, his presence commanding respect. As he took the podium, his words carried the weight of both personal experience and professional expertise. What happened on that flight wasn't just wrong, it was bad business, Darnell stated firmly. Discrimination costs companies billions annually in lost talent, customer attrition, and legal liability. Our goal isn't just to make Skyline more equitable, it's to make it more successful by ensuring all customers and employees are treated with dignity and respect. As Darnell outlined the initial phase of reforms, the hotel ballroom doors suddenly burst open. Warren Huntington strode in, his face flushed with indignation, trailed by security personnel who had tried to stop him. "This is outrageous," Warren shouted, drawing all attention to his dramatic entrance. "You're destroying a great American company based on a personal grievance." Security moved to remove him, but Jamal raised a hand to stop them. "Let him speak," he said calmly. "This is precisely the kind of entitlement that needs to be addressed openly." Warren approached the press area, clearly expecting support for his position. "This man," he pointed accusingly at Jamal, "is using his position to pursue a personal vendetta. He's playing the race card to justify a corporate takeover." The room fell silent, journalists watching the confrontation unfold with rapt attention. "Mr. Huntington," Jamal responded evenly, "would you care to explain why you believed you were entitled to a seat that was rightfully purchased by another passenger?" "I'm a Diamond Elite member with over 1,000,000 miles, Warren retorted. "The airline has always accommodated loyal customers like me." "At the expense of other paying customers?" Jamal asked. "Some customers are more valuable than others," Warren stated dismissively. "That's just business." A murmur rippled through the press corps as Warren's words confirmed exactly the attitude Jamal had described. "And how do you determine which customers are more valuable?" Jamal pressed. Warren faltered, suddenly aware of the hole he was digging for himself on national television. "This isn't about one seat on one flight," Jamal continued, addressing the room rather than Warren directly. "It's about a corporate culture that deemed some individuals more deserving of respect and service than others, often along racial lines." Warren attempted to interrupt, but Jamal continued. "Mr. Huntington, our investigation has uncovered that you've been involved in 8 separate incidents where passengers of color were displaced to accommodate your upgrades, despite them having confirmed reservations." Security finally escorted a sputtering Warren from the room as Jamal returned to his prepared remarks. "Today, we're announcing several immediate changes," he continued seamlessly. "First, a comprehensive anti-discrimination initiative that will be implemented across all GlobeTech companies, starting with Skyline Airlines." He outlined the key components: mandatory training for all staff, revised service protocols, a transparent complaint resolution process, and accountability measures with real consequences for violations. Second, we're establishing a passenger Bill of Rights with clear anti-discrimination provisions that will be prominently displayed in all Skyline communications and facilities. The third announcement generated the most significant reaction. We're creating an independent review board to evaluate all discrimination complaints filed against Skyline in the past 5 years. This board will have authority to recommend appropriate remedies, including compensation for affected passengers and disciplinary actions for responsible employees. As the press conference continued, screens displayed live social media reactions, predominantly positive, with hashtags like corporate accountability and leadership matters trending alongside Skyline changes. From the back of the room, Victoria Blackwell watched with a calculated expression. Other board members who had flown in for emergency meetings observed the proceedings with varying reactions. Some clearly uncomfortable with the public nature of the confrontation, others recognizing the strategic value of Jamal's approach. As the formal presentation concluded and the question period began, journalists pressed for details on the potential business impact of these sweeping changes. "Aren't you concerned about shareholder value?" asked a reporter from a financial news network. "I'm focused on long-term shareholder value," Jamal replied confidently. "Discrimination isn't just morally wrong, It's financially unsustainable. The potential legal liability from class action lawsuits alone could have cost hundreds of millions. More importantly, companies that fail to address systemic bias lose talent, customers, and market share to more inclusive competitors. Another journalist raised her hand. Some industry analysts are suggesting these changes will cause operational disruptions that could affect Skyline's reliability. How do you respond? There may be short-term adjustments, Jamal acknowledged. But we've implemented transition plans to ensure continuous operations. Our focus is on cultural and policy changes that improve service for all passengers, not just those who look like Mr. Huntington. As the press conference neared its conclusion, Jamal addressed the corporate response directly. I'm aware that some within GlobeTech and Skyline are resistant to these changes. Change is always uncomfortable, especially for those who benefited from the previous system. But leadership isn't about maintaining comfortable inequities. It's about creating better organizations that serve all stakeholders ethically and effectively. With that powerful statement, he concluded the formal presentation. As journalists swarmed forward with follow-up questions, Darnell Johnson joined Jamal at the podium. Together, they presented a united front, articulate, determined, and unwavering in their commitment to meaningful change. Behind the scenes, Jamal's team monitored the immediate market reaction. GlobeTech's stock, which had dropped sharply at the opening bell, had begun to stabilize as the press conference progressed. Analysts were revising their initially negative assessments, noting the potential long-term benefits of addressing these liability issues proactively. As Jamal finally stepped away from the podium, Victoria Blackwell approached him directly. "Impressive performance," she said, her tone neutral, but her eyes evaluating. "You've bought yourself some time with the board. Morrison and his allies are reconsidering their position, at least temporarily. But they're still not convinced," Jamal surmised. Victoria nodded. "They're business people, Jamal. Show them that this approach makes financial sense and you'll win them over." "And you?" he asked. "Where do you stand now?" Victoria glanced toward the dispersing press corps. "I'm still in your corner. But I need to know, did you anticipate this outcome when you boarded that flight? Was this a calculated move?" Jamal considered the question carefully. "I didn't board expecting discrimination," he answered honestly. "But I was prepared to address it if it occurred. The acquisition timing created an unusual opportunity to experience Skyline as a customer before anyone knew who I was." Victoria studied him for a moment longer, then nodded with newfound respect. "Well played then. But the real challenge begins now, implementing these changes while managing the corporate fallout." As they spoke, Jamal received an urgent message from Lydia. Former Skyline executives were already contacting competitors, offering insider information and attempting to undermine the transition. Meanwhile, Warren Huntington had appeared on another news program, making increasingly personal attacks against Jamal's character and qualifications. The battle had only just begun, but Jamal had successfully seized control of the narrative. As he left the press conference surrounded by his team, he knew that the next phase would test not just his leadership abilities, but his personal resilience in the face of escalating resistance. 1 week after the fateful flight that had triggered a corporate earthquake, Jamal Washington stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his temporary office at Skyline's Atlanta headquarters. The city skyline glittered in the evening light, stark contrast to the turbulence inside the building. His phone buzzed with a message from Amara Jackson. "Emergency board meeting called for 9 a.m. tomorrow. Morrison secured enough votes. Formal motion to restrict your personnel authority." Jamal had expected this. Despite the largely positive public response to his press conference, the internal resistance had been organizing methodically. Warren Huntington had been remarkably effective at leveraging his country club connections with board members, painting Jamal as a reckless ideologue whose actions threatened shareholder value. "They're making their move," he informed Lydia, who was reviewing security reports nearby. She looked up with concern. "Victoria warned this might happen. Do we have a counter-strategy?" "We do," Jamal confirmed. "But first, give me the latest updates." Lydia efficiently summarized the current situation. The stock had stabilized somewhat but remained volatile. Former Skyline executives were actively undermining the transition, with Howard Phillips reportedly in talks with 3 competitors about consulting positions where he would bring valuable customer relationships with him. Most concerning were the increasingly specific threats. Security had intercepted 2 individuals attempting to access restricted areas of the headquarters the previous night. Online threats had escalated from vague intimidation to detailed references to Jamal's family members and daily routines. "The security team recommends changing hotels again tonight," Lydia advised. "They've identified suspicious surveillance activity near your current location." Jamal nodded grimly. The personal cost of his stand against discrimination was mounting. His family had been relocated to a secure location, his normal routines completely disrupted, and the constant security presence was a stark reminder of the dangers he now faced. Just as they finished reviewing the security protocols, Darnell Johnson arrived for their scheduled meeting. Over the past week, Darnell had proven himself invaluable, not just for his expertise in organizational systems, but for his calm determination in the face of resistance. "You look like you could use some good news," Darnell observed, noting Jamal's expression. "I definitely could," Jamal agreed. "Then I'm happy to oblige. The customer response to our initial changes has been overwhelming." Darnell handed over a tablet displaying analytics from the past 72 hours. "Complaint rates are down 42%, and we're seeing positive social media mentions increase by nearly 60%. The data showed that while some business travelers like Warren Huntington were vocally opposed to the new policies that prevented preferential treatment based on subjective factors, the vast majority of customers were responding positively to the more equitable service standards. "The frontline employees are the real surprise," Darnell continued. "Despite initial resistance from some managers, we've had over 300 staff members volunteer for the Advanced Inclusion Training program. Many have privately shared stories of how uncomfortable they were with the previous practices, but felt powerless to change them." This aligned with what Jamal had discovered throughout the organization. The discriminatory culture hadn't represented the values of most employees, but had been enforced from the top down through incentive, structures, and implicit expectations. Their strategy session was interrupted by Dylan Alvarez, who burst in with breaking news. "You need to see this," he said, activating the office's main screen. It displayed a live stream of customers at airports across the country wearing shirts and holding signs with variations of "I stand with Jamal" and "Fly with Dignity" slogans. "This started organically about 2 hours ago," Dylan explained. "Passengers are posting selfies showing support for the changes. It's spreading across all major hubs." The images showed diverse travelers of all backgrounds publicly supporting Skyline's new direction. Many shared personal stories of previous discriminatory experiences and their appreciation for a company finally taking decisive action. "This is exactly what we needed," Jamal said, his spirits lifting. "Real customers showing the board that these changes have market support." As they watched the growing movement, Jamal's phone rang with a surprising caller ID. Colin Zhang, CEO of Westbound Airlines, Skyline's largest competitor. "Mr. Washington," Zhang began when Jamal answered, "I'm calling to discuss an unusual situation. Several of Skyline's former executives have approached us with what they claim is proprietary customer data, offering to bring major accounts with them if we hire them as consultants." Zhang paused before continuing. "I want to be clear that Westbound doesn't engage in such practices. We compete vigorously, but ethically. I thought you should know about these approaches." After thanking Zhang for the information, Jamal turned to his team. "Howard and his allies are getting desperate. They're trying to sabotage the airline by poaching major accounts. That could actually help us," Amara observed. "If they're engaging in corporate espionage, we have grounds for legal action that would neutralize their influence." The unexpected call from Zhang represented a turning point. Over the next few hours, 2 other airline CEOs made similar calls, distancing themselves from the former Skyline executives' unethical approaches. The industry was watching how Jamal handled this situation, and many leaders recognized the potential precedent it would set for their own companies. By evening, another surprising development emerged. Victoria Blackwell requested an urgent private meeting at Jamal's hotel, Security cleared a conference room and swept it for surveillance devices before her arrival. When Victoria entered, her usually composed demeanor showed signs of strain. "I've spent the last 3 hours arguing with Morrison and his faction," she began without preamble. "They're determined to proceed with tomorrow's vote." "I expected as much," Jamal replied. "What's their exact play?" "They'll propose limitations requiring board approval for any personnel changes at the VP level or above, and any policy changes with potential revenue impact exceeding $5 million. Victoria's expression was grim. "It would effectively prevent you from implementing the structural changes you've announced." Jamal nodded thoughtfully. "And the vote count?" "They claim to have 7 votes, including Powell, who was on the fence yesterday." Victoria hesitated before adding, "They've been sharing selective financial projections suggesting your changes will reduce premium revenue by 28%. "Manipulated numbers," Jamal stated with certainty. "Our actual projections show an initial dip, followed by growth exceeding previous levels within 2 quarters. Victoria studied him carefully. "There's something else you should know. Warren Huntington has been surprisingly effective at turning board members against you. His influence runs deeper than I initially realized." "I'm not surprised," Jamal replied. "Men like Warren have built careers on exclusive relationships cultivated in spaces where people like me were historically unwelcome." Victoria's expression shifted subtly. "I understand that dynamic better than you might think." She paused, seeming to decide something important. "I haven't shared this widely, but early in my career, I faced systematic exclusion and harassment as one of the few women in investment banking." This personal revelation from the normally reserved Victoria surprised Jamal. "The tactics were different, but the message was the same," she continued. "That I didn't belong in leadership spaces, that my presence was a concession to political correctness rather than merit." Victoria straightened her posture, her resolve visibly strengthening. "I fought those battles largely alone because that's what we were expected to do then. But watching you take this stand publicly has made me reconsider that approach." "What are you suggesting?" Jamal asked. "A different strategy for tomorrow's board meeting," Victoria replied. "One that addresses the underlying issue rather than just the immediate vote." As they discussed tactics for the crucial confrontation ahead, Jamal received another urgent message. Warren Huntington had appeared on an evening business program, claiming to have documents proving Jamal had orchestrated the entire incident as a publicity stunt. "He's getting increasingly desperate," Jamal observed. "And increasingly dangerous," Victoria added. "Men like Warren are most volatile when their privilege is threatened." Their planning session was interrupted by a security alert. Amara called. With disturbing news, someone had leaked Jamal's hotel location online, and a small but vocal group of protesters had gathered in the lobby, holding signs with racist slogans and demanding his resignation. "We need to move you to a secure location immediately," Amara insisted. As security coordinated his discreet exit through a service entrance, Jamal and Victoria finalized their strategy for the board confrontation. Despite the mounting pressure and personal risk, Jamal remained resolute in his commitment to meaningful change. The protesters below, the threatened board vote, Warren's escalating attacks, all confirmed what Jamal had always known. Real transformation never came without resistance. The systems that preserved privilege for some at the expense of others wouldn't surrender without a fight. But now, something had shifted. He was no longer fighting alone. From the spontaneous, customer support campaign to industry leaders distancing themselves from unethical tactics to Victoria's unexpected allyship, a coalition was forming around the principles of equity and accountability. As Jamal was escorted to a new secure location in preparation for the next day's crucial board meeting, Darnell called with one final piece of news. His team had discovered something significant while reviewing internal communications. Evidence linking Warren Huntington directly to previous incidents where discrimination complaints had been buried. "We found emails between Warren and Howard from the past 3 years, Darnell explained. Warren personally intervened to have at least 5 discrimination complaints dismissed, threatening to take his corporate account elsewhere if the employees involved were disciplined. This revelation completed the picture. Warren wasn't merely a privileged passenger, but an active participant in reinforcing the discriminatory culture at Skyline. The evidence would prove crucial in the confrontation to come. That night, despite the threats and uncertainty, Jamal slept soundly for the first time in days. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, but he faced them now with growing allies and mounting evidence that his approach wasn't just morally right, but strategically sound. The resistance he faced only confirmed the necessity of his mission. Systems of inequity didn't yield easily, but with persistence and principle, even the most entrenched cultures could be transformed. 3 months after Jamal Washington's removal from his first-class seat, the GlobeTech Board of Directors convened for their quarterly meeting in the company's gleaming headquarters. The atmosphere differed dramatically from their emergency session. 90 days earlier, when Warren Huntington's allies had attempted to restrict Jamal's authority, that pivotal meeting had taken an unexpected turn when Victoria Blackwell, speaking with the moral authority of her 4 decades in corporate leadership, had shared her own experiences with systemic discrimination. Her testimony had shifted the dynamic in the boardroom, particularly when coupled with the damning evidence linking Warren Huntington directly to the suppression of previous discrimination complaints at Skyline. Today, as board members settled into their seats around the polished conference table, the mood was one of cautious optimism. Randall Morrison, once Jamal's most vocal critic on the board, studied the quarterly financial report with visible surprise. "These numbers can't be right," he muttered, flipping through the pages. Skyline's passenger revenue is up 17% over projections. Jamal, seated at the head of the table, allowed himself a small smile. "The numbers are accurate, Randall. Our finance team triple-checked them before distribution." Victoria Blackwell, now serving as GlobeTech's lead independent director, added, "Customer satisfaction metrics show even more impressive gains. Overall scores are up 32%. With particularly strong improvements among business travelers." The comprehensive performance data painted a clear picture. After an initial period of adjustment, Skyline Airlines had not just recovered, but was outperforming its pre-transformation metrics across all significant measures. Customer complaints had decreased by 64%. Employee retention had improved by 28%. Operating costs had decreased due to more efficient service protocols. Social media sentiment had shifted from predominantly negative to overwhelmingly positive. The most telling metric, Jamal highlighted, is the 78% reduction in potential legal liability from discrimination claims. That represents not just moral progress, but significant financial risk mitigation. Even the most skeptical board members couldn't argue with the results. What had initially been viewed as a risky, ideologically driven overhaul was now clearly demonstrating business benefits that extended beyond public relations value. As the meeting progressed, Darnell Johnson presented the cultural transformation initiatives that had driven these improvements. As Skyline's Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, he had implemented structural changes that went far beyond superficial training programs, revised service protocols that eliminated subjective preferential treatment, transparent promotion criteria that reduced bias in advancement decisions, accountability metrics tied to executive compensation, a completely redesigned complaint resolution system with independent oversight. The key insight, Darnell explained, was recognizing that discrimination wasn't just a moral failure, but an operational inefficiency. By establishing clear, objective standards for service and advancement, we've improved outcomes for everyone, not just those who previously experienced discrimination. The board members listened attentively, including those who had initially opposed Jamal's approach. The data spoke for itself. Victoria Blackwell, who had become Jamal's strongest ally during the transformation period, addressed the group with characteristic directness. "I want to acknowledge that I was among those concerned about the pace and public nature of these changes," she admitted. "I worried about short-term market reactions and reputational risk. I was wrong." Her candor created space for other board members to reconsider their initial opposition. Morrison, still reviewing the financial data with evident surprise, cleared his throat. "I think it's appropriate for this board to formally recognize the success of this initiative," he stated, addressing Jamal directly. "Your approach, while unorthodox, has yielded results that speak for themselves. Coming from his former opponent, this represented a significant victory, but Jamal was more interested in sustainable change than personal vindication. "The credit belongs to the entire team," he responded, "particularly the frontline employees who embraced these changes despite initial uncertainty." As the meeting continued, they received an update on Warren Huntington, whose vindictive campaign against Jamal had ultimately backfired spectacularly. His attempts to undermine the transformation had crossed legal boundaries when he shared confidential Skyline customer data with competitors. This corporate espionage, combined with evidence of his role in suppressing previous discrimination complaints, had resulted in both civil and criminal investigations. Mr. Huntington's legal troubles extend beyond his actions regarding Skyline, reported Amara Jackson, now serving as Globetech's chief legal officer. Authorities have uncovered a pattern of similar behavior at other companies where he wielded his customer status as a weapon against employees of color who displeased him. The board meeting concluded with unanimous approval for the next phase of the transformation initiative, extending the successful Skyline model to all Globetech subsidiaries. What had begun as a response to a single incident of discrimination had evolved into a comprehensive corporate philosophy that was proving both ethically sound and financially advantageous. As board members filed out, many stopped to personally congratulate Jamal, including several who had opposed him initially. Victoria remained behind, waiting until they were alone to speak candidly. "You've accomplished something remarkable," she said. "Not just the business results, impressive as they are, but shifting entrenched mindsets that many of us thought were immovable." "It's just the beginning," Jamal replied. "Real change takes sustained commitment." Victoria nodded in agreement. "Which brings me to a delicate matter. Rebecca Miller and Thomas Carter have completed the rehabilitation program. They've requested a meeting with you." Jamal raised an eyebrow in surprise. The flight attendants who had discriminated against him had been among the most vocal critics of the transformation initially. "They've gone through intensive sensitivity training and community service," Victoria continued. "According to their program supervisors, they've shown genuine growth and understanding." Later that afternoon, Jamal met with Rebecca and Thomas in a small conference room. Their transformation was visible. Gone was the entitled indignation that had characterized their initial response to being held accountable. They appeared genuinely remorseful. "Mr. Washington," Rebecca began hesitantly, "I want to thank you for creating this second chance program. I won't waste your time with excuses for my behavior. What I did was wrong, and the past 3 months have opened my eyes to patterns I didn't even recognize in myself." Thomas nodded in agreement. "We're not asking for our old positions back. We understand that trust must be earned. But we would like the opportunity to be part of the solution rather than remaining symbols of the problem." Jamal studied them thoughtfully. Their journey reflected the broader transformation he hoped to achieve. Not just punishing past behavior, but creating pathways for genuine change. "Skyline's new flight attendant apprenticeship program begins next month," he told them. "It includes mentoring underrepresented communities interested in aviation careers. If you're serious about being part of the solution, that would be a meaningful place to start." Their grateful acceptance suggested their transformation might be genuine. While Jamal remained appropriately cautious, he believed in second chances. A value that had now been institutionalized in Skyline's rehabilitation program for employees who had perpetuated discriminatory practices but demonstrated commitment to change. That evening, Jamal delivered the keynote address at a major business conference focused on corporate culture. The ballroom was filled beyond capacity, with industry leaders eager to understand the approach that had transformed Skyline from a cautionary tale into a case study in successful culture change. 3 months ago, I was removed from a first-class seat despite having a confirmed reservation, Jamal began, immediately capturing the audience's attention. Today, I'm not here to revisit that incident, but to share what we've learned about transforming corporate culture in its aftermath. He outlined the structural changes, policy reforms, and accountability measures that had driven Skyline's remarkable turnaround. But more importantly, he emphasized the business case for inclusivity, how addressing discrimination had improved operational efficiency, reduced legal exposure, enhanced customer satisfaction, and ultimately increased profitability. This isn't about political correctness or virtue signaling, he stated firmly. It's about building better businesses that serve all stakeholders effectively. Discrimination isn't just morally wrong, it's financially unsustainable. The impact of Jamal's approach extended far beyond Skyline and GlobeTech. Industry publications documented the Washington method of cultural transformation, and competitors began implementing similar accountability measures and service standards. What had begun as one company's response to discrimination was evolving into an industry-wide reassessment of practices that had long been accepted as normal. Perhaps most significantly, Jamal's original vision for Phoenix Innovations had flourished amid the corporate transformation. The international investors he'd been traveling to meet that fateful day had been impressed by his principled leadership during the crisis. Their partnership had enabled Phoenix to expand its sustainable energy solutions to developing nations across 3 continents, creating environmental benefits alongside significant financial returns. Darnell Johnson's role had expanded as well. From his initial position as Skyline's Diversity and Inclusion Officer, he had been promoted to oversee cultural transformation across all GlobeTech companies. His consulting firm had merged with Phoenix Innovations' Organizational Development Division, creating a powerhouse that helped other corporations implement similar reforms. One morning, 6 months after the incident, Jamal found himself back at O'Hare International Airport, preparing to board another Skyline flight to Atlanta. This time, he wasn't traveling incognito as an anonymous passenger, but openly as the company's CEO. The difference in the airport experience was striking. Digital displays featured Skyline's new passenger Bill of Rights prominently. Staff interactions with travelers showed consistent respect, regardless of appearance or status. The gate areas buzzed with the energy of an organization where employees felt valued and empowered. As Jamal boarded the plane, he was greeted by a flight attendant who didn't need to check his boarding pass twice or question his presence in first class. The crew operated with a professional efficiency that came from clear protocols and expectations rather than subjective judgments about which passengers deserved premium service. Midway through the flight, Jamal noticed a young black man in business attire being treated with the same courtesy and respect as all other passengers. A simple human dignity that shouldn't have been remarkable, but represented meaningful progress nonetheless. After landing in Atlanta, Jamal visited a youth center in the city's historically underserved West Side. There, he and Darnell had established a mentorship program for young people interested in business careers. The foundation they had created provided scholarships, internships, and ongoing support for students from backgrounds typically underrepresented in corporate leadership. As they met with the current cohort of high school students preparing for college, Jamal shared his journey from Southside Chicago to the executive suite. He didn't minimize the obstacles they would face, but emphasized that systemic change happened when those who broke through barriers held the door open for others. The measure of success isn't just your individual achievement, he told them. It's whether you create pathways for those who come after you. A young woman raised her hand. But when you face discrimination, how do you know when to fight and when to just focus on your own path? Jamal considered her question thoughtfully. There's no simple answer. Sometimes the strategic choice is to document the problem and address it when you have the position to create meaningful change. Other times, immediate confrontation is necessary to prevent harm. The key is remembering that each choice is part of a longer journey toward justice. As the session concluded, Jamal reflected on how a moment of discrimination had catalyzed transformation far beyond what he could have anticipated. The incident on that flight hadn't just changed Skyline Airlines, it had created ripple effects throughout an industry, opened opportunities for countless individuals, and demonstrated that principled leadership could be both morally right and commercially successful. The true victory wasn't just in proving his critics wrong or vindicating his approach. It was in creating systems that would continue advancing equity and inclusion long after the original incident had faded from public memory. On the flight home, Jamal glanced at his watch, the same understated luxury timepiece he'd worn the day he was removed from his seat. The journey had come full circle, but the transformation was ongoing. Real change wasn't a single dramatic confrontation, but the patient, persistent work of rebuilding systems to serve everyone with dignity and respect. Have you ever witnessed someone turning an injustice into an opportunity for positive change? What do you think about Jamal's approach to transforming the entire company rather than just firing a few employees? Comment below with your thoughts. If this story inspired you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message of courage and transformation. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, sometimes the greatest changes begin with a single moment of standing up for what's right. This powerful story teaches us that true leadership means addressing systemic problems at their roots, not just treating symptoms. Jamal Washington didn't simply seek revenge for his humiliation, he recognized an opportunity to transform an entire corporate culture that enabled discrimination. The lesson here is that meaningful change requires courage at multiple levels. It takes courage to stand up against discrimination when you experience it personally. It takes even greater courage to challenge established systems rather than accepting the status quo. And it takes tremendous courage to offer second chances to those who have wronged you, understanding that true transformation includes creating pathways for growth and redemption. Another crucial lesson is that doing the right thing ethically can also be the right business decision. By addressing discrimination directly, Jamal improved customer satisfaction, reduced legal liability, enhanced employee retention, and ultimately increased profitability. This challenges the false narrative that ethical considerations and business success are opposing forces. Perhaps most importantly, this story reminds us that one person with principle and purpose can create ripple effects far beyond their immediate circumstances. Jamal's stand against a single incident of discrimination ultimately transformed an industry, created opportunities for countless others, and established new standards for corporate accountability.